Okay, so one of the first services that I'd like to take a look at here on our systems is going to be our networking service. This is one of the most fundamental services that certainly a lot of other services go and use and are built off of. So understanding our network service is actually really critical. Now back to kind of my little list of tips that I was talking about in a previous video. I definitely emphasize start by saying just learn basic networking, right? Certainly that's a lot of what we're trying to do by going to the competition, but any type of details you can pull from your networking classes and networking fundamental type ideas, those are all going to be critical to you being able to understand what are the details of the service that I need to pay attention to. So, and for this particular service, we definitely also want to understand that what distribution you're on can have a serious impact on the buttons you have to click, the files you have to mess with, how the commands actually work. This is where we really start to deviate from some of the previous entry-level videos where it's like, yeah, the commands kind of work the same across every distribution. It's like when we're talking about a networking service, things are going to start to be a bit different across our different boxes here. So having said that, you will certainly see me here go from one particular system to another system from our mini hack virtual machines so that we can kind of compare, okay, this is what it looks like in Ubuntu, this is what it looks like in Kali, this is what it looks like in CentOS. There's some differences and nuances about each one, and let's do this in a very comparative way and be comfortable across all the systems. Now, one of the classic ways that we used to be able to check for our networking was actually, and lots of websites still have this, was to use the ifconfig command, ifconfig. This is one way you used to be able to see how is your networking configured. And the issue, of course, is that on newer Ubuntu systems, which is what you're very likely to get at a competition, this particular command actually is not installed anymore. All right, so Ubuntu gives you a little warning here and tells you, like, yeah, the ifconfig command, this is actually part of something called NetTools. So if you don't have the NetTools package installed on your system, then this type of command won't work. And so what I'm also emphasizing here is that there's lots of web pages out on the internet that will tell you this is how you can go and manage your service, and this is how you can go and get information. But those web pages might have been around for 10 years. And so a lot of those web pages, if they haven't been updated with some of the newer commands, then just realize that this might happen, that not every command comes native to any system anymore. And this used to work in Ubuntu. Once upon a time, you know, you could run ifconfig and get some information about your system this way, about your networking system. But now we can't, all right? So what I definitely recommend is that you would learn about the IP command, So IP is a different command that has some other options off of it. And one of the most common options you're running off it is the A option. So you can just do IP space A, all right? And so if you do an IP space A on your Ubuntu computer, what you'll see here is that they list out now with the IPA command, they list out all of the adapters, all of the network interfaces that you currently have available on your distribution here of Ubuntu. And so that they show you here that the first one oftentimes is LO, which stands here for the loopback adapter. All right, so this loopback interface, if you learn a little bit about networking, you should know what the loopback address is. But this particular loopback address is oftentimes used for internal testing. It's a way to try to connect to yourself or try sending signals to yourself. And so that's what this interface is set up for, the LO interface. And you can see here down below, the internet address associated with this, the INET address that it has here is 127.0.0.1, right? The classic loopback address. So that is something that we do see here on this list. But that's usually not one that we're interested in trying to configure to go match and bring our computer online. The other interface that we oftentimes encounter when we're on Ubuntu systems down here we see is ENS18. Right, so we've got a number 2, and now it says ENS18. And as we look down through the details through this, what we notice is that this one does not currently have an IP address, right? So it would have this INET space and then 127. You know, it had some number after it if this actually had an internet address associated with it. So yes, each interface can have an IP address associated with it, or it doesn't have to. It might not have one right now. And so that's the current state that our Ubuntu computer is in, and that's why we kept getting those network notifications notification pop-ups. It's like, hey, you don't have an address right now. Hey, you don't have an address right now. And it's like, I know, Ubuntu, I'm getting there. We'll get to it. All right. But anyways, this is our ENS18 interface, and we can see that there's just no details associated with it. With the IPA command, very useful command. You're going to run this multiple times during a competition. Now, another thing that I'd like to emphasize here is I said this is going to be different on different distributions. So let's hop over to the Kali machine. I'll make this one go full screen, and let's see what does it look like on the Kali machine. All right, so if I kind of do the same thing, I log in with sandbox and password to be able to get into this one. Oops, I have the website open from before, that's okay. And if I pop open a terminal here on our Kali machine, just right click and say open terminal, or you could click up at the top, they got a little terminal shortcut up there. You know, you can get dropped into a terminal here, and it's like, hey, a lot of the same commands that we were just learning about in Ubuntu, they'll work just the same over here as well. I could make user accounts and ls and cd and kind of look around and see where I am, and it's like, yeah, I've got a sandbox user over here on the Kali side as well. But we're specifically trying to learn about the networking now at the moment. So if I take a look at that same set of commands, the ifconfig command inside Kali, we'll see, hey, this one actually works. So on the Kali system, this does have the NetTools currently installed, and so ifconfig is a command that's supported right now in Kali, but it's not one that's supported in Ubuntu. So although it's not a bad command to learn, it's really a little bit better, I think, to learn the IPA command, because this is something that usually will work across different platforms. It'll work across your different distributions. So either one will still give you access to your networking details on Kali machines, but on some of the others it won't. So nevertheless, what I want to emphasize here is whether you do an ifconfig or whether you do an IPA, you kind of get about the same output. And in a future video, we might look at some of the differences between this. But for the most part, you see, yeah, the Kali machine also has a loopback address, right? It also has an internal address of 127.0.0.1, and that's an IP address it can use to reference itself. So if you send signals to 127.0.0.1 on the Kali machine, it sends it to itself. And it does the same thing on the Ubuntu machine. The Ubuntu machine, if you send signals to 127.0.0.1, it ends up sending it to itself. All right, so useful address to kind of realize. But if we look down here to number 2, this one we see is called ETH0. And as we look a little bit further down the line, it's like, yeah, actually this one does have an internet address already. We can see here it says 172.20.0.2. All right, so the internet address associated with this has actually already been assigned. Whereas when we looked over at the Ubuntu computer, it's like, well, this one didn't have any of that information. So yes, it's possible you might get some servers on competition day that they already have addresses associated with them. Maybe they don't. Either way, you need to learn how to kind of configure this stuff for yourself and identify the differences. Now, here's another real classic problem that I see a lot happening as people start working with different distributions, and that's what is the name of your interface on that distribution? Lots of websites oftentimes say, hey, go out and look at your ETH0 interface. It's like, well, that only works for certain types of hardware, for certain types of distributions. When we're on our Ubuntu distribution, we don't have an ETH0 interface. We currently have an ENS18 interface. So learning what is the interface actually called on my computer right now is a really critical thing to be able to do. If you run any commands on the Ubuntu computer that call or interact with the ETH0 interface, it's going to fail. It's not going to be right. Right? You have to have the ENS18 interface while we're working on this Ubuntu computer, at least right now. And on our Kali computer, we can see it's like, well, this one was called the ETH0 interface over here. So learning what is my interface right now on this computer is certainly a really critical thing to be able to do. Let's come full circle with this, and let's actually take a look at our CentOS machine as well. All right, so I'll come back over here to my interface, and I'll pull open the CentOS computer. Remember, this is the one that was all black and white, just me and the command line. There's no GUI with this one. We can still log in with the same thing of sandbox and password, and it looks like here I am. I'm logged in still from previously. And now I can go and run a lot of the same commands that I did before, including things like the IPA command. All right, and when I run the IPA command on my CentOS computer, we'll notice something significantly different this time. It's like, well, I still have the loopback address, but now I have an ETH0 and an ETH1 adapter. So yes, your computer can have multiple network interfaces. And why is that so common on this particular device? It's like, well, this one is meant to be a router. So routers can connect to multiple networks at the same time. That's how they route traffic from one network to another network. They have to be connected to both networks. And so that's going to be a critical thing for us here to successfully configure our networking and then eventually go and configure a router is I'll have to configure one of my interfaces to be connected to one network, and I'll have to configure one of my other interfaces to be connected to a different network. And that's what will allow the traffic to go through the router across my different interfaces from one network to the other. Well, right now my Kali machine, it doesn't have that luxury, right? The Kali machine right now, this is something that just has a single interface, just my ETH0. And then, of course, finally, the Ubuntu computer, it had this ENS18, right? So we're just kind of seeing some of the differences by running these base commands, this base IPA command across the different virtual machines that we have here for a mini hack, all right?